By the way, why do people hate Bill Gates so much? I'd hazard a guess. He's a fake person now. And what I mean by that is that there was the real Bill Gates during the 1990s and 80s and 60s, 70s and 60s, and he was a ruthless businessman, and he delighted in being a ruthless businessman. If you look at the interviews of him in the 90s, you had this guy who's like, I'm going to crush you, and I'm just going to take joy in crushing you. And he had this little smile on his face, and everybody got that. They understood it, and he was the king of his jungle. And we as business people, we admired that. We said, wow, look how ruthless this businessman is. And look what he can accomplish. Look what he's built. He turned Microsoft into a $600 billion company. And now he's the savior of the world. And there's this cognitive disconnect between Bill Gates, the ruthless businessman, and Bill Gates, the savior of the world. And people have a hard time reconciling those two things. The body language doesn't match. You see a lot of duper's delight when he's talking, and he says we need to do X, but then you're always wondering, like, there's got to be more to this. A guy like this doesn't think this way. He thinks this other way, and this is why people see a fundamental lack of sincerity in Bill. I don't for a moment believe he's gotten rid of his competitive nature. You just can't. If you I love deep thought on things because I was a mathematician. I remember one time I worked on a single math problem for 26 hours. I started at 2 a.m. I finished at 4 a.m. the following day. And I was like, oh, I've been working on this 2 hours. And I was like, oh shit, it's the next day. I should probably stop at like sleep or something. I don't know. I mean, there's some people that are just born certain ways and they have proclivities to certain things when they're fascinated with that. And if you're a ruthless businessman, you never give that up. You never give up that competitive edge. So then you go to the charity world and everything's slow and all this stuff. Nobody trusts that. They don't believe in that. So he says, oh, we should do X. What's the angle here? Like if he's investing in this country to save them, does he own some of the real estate there? I mean, there's always got to be some angle. Why is he giving all his money away, but his net wealth keeps increasing on the Forbes list? It's like, what's the story there? So it's a good case study where your actions and the things you say and do, they have to be consistent. They have to match each other. And when there's a mismatch, people don't trust you. Another great example of that's Mitt Romney. I know Mitt Romney. I met him a few times, and Mitt's a brilliant guy. He had MBA, JD from Harvard, an incredibly good businessman, super, super good at business fundamentals. There are very few people I've ever met that you can just drop into a situation and they have a pretty good sense of how to fix a business. They just know the fundamentals like the back of their hand. And so Mitt, that guy, and Mitt, the family man, great. But then when he ran for office, it was just like, you could put YouTube clips of what he said against Ted Kennedy to when he ran for president in 2016. Totally different people. Same guy. And so you're just thinking, how could you have such divergence and say things that you don't believe? Especially because you argued the opposite thing at some point. So people knew that lack of sincerity there, and they could smell it and they could taste it. And despite the fact that you have this hyper-competent guy who's clearly very successful, nobody trusts him because there's a mismatch there. And I think there's somehow a nonverbal mismatch, the way that Gates presents things and does things. And there's a stylistic mismatch where he wants to rule by consensus, but he still has that Microsoft mentality of dominance. And it leaks into the efforts. It leaks into the things that they do. And it's a great tragedy because at the end of the day, there are a lot of incredibly good things that happen. We run into those efforts going throughout Africa, and we've seen the good things that have happened. And yet over the internet, it's just like, you'd read this guy's like a depopulationist, globalist, genocidal maniac that wants to kill a third of the world population or something. Meanwhile, we go to Africa, we understand the problems they're working on. Simple things like, how do you get vaccines that don't need to be refrigerated? How do you get a better toilet? Because millions of people die from poor sanitation. How do you get nets for mosquitoes so people don't die of malaria? Little things. And hundreds of missteps and trying their best. And there's very good people that work with them. And we rub shoulders with people who used to work at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on various projects. And there's thorough professionals and very competent, and they love what they do, and they firmly believe in the mission, and they want to help people. There's not a bad bone in their body, ever. So despite the fact that he can't seem to broadcast sincerity, he does seem to have the ability to attract some of the brightest people in the world to do great things. And you just judge things on a case-by-case basis, and you see how things come. I just think it's a bad idea to pretend to be what you're not. If you're the world's richest man, you can't pretend to be poor. If you're the world's richest man, you can't pretend to be relatable. The guy is a genius, and the guy is unique. And there are very few people you'll ever meet in your life who are as talented, capable, and just absolutely to the right of the curve as a guy like Bill Gates. So he shouldn't, in my view, pretend not to be that guy. Steve Jobs never did, and other people in that order never did. They knew who they were, and they said, let's just instead focus on the magic of what we're doing and why what we're doing is great, instead of trying to be relatable.